Okay, so in this one, we are going to be covering a little bit more of this checkout user interface. So what I want to do is make these look a little bit, well, just make them a little bit more dynamic than how they are. So like if they hover it, it'll show a color behind it and, just look a little nicer. So to do that, we want to open up Sublime Text. Oh, and there's one other thing that I do want to mention is I can't actually click on Finalize Checkout. So if I want to take a look at this, there's a reason for it, and it has to do with what's called a z-index. And since this position is fixed, the z-index does change some stuff. So if I actually go ahead and look at the current total here, I'm going to go to Inspect Element here, and I'm going to have to do it on the other side. Oh, okay, so let me just go ahead and grab this total right here. If I grab that and get rid of Position Fixed, it changes the layout, and then I can actually click on Finalize Checkout. If I keep it at fixed, then it changes the layout back, but that's not actually how it starts. But I can no longer select Finalize Checkout unless I go below that billing address. So it's something we want to fix, and we'll do that first. And to do that, I'm going to scroll up to where our total amount is, which is here. So this is one block that I'm going to have, and then the next block all the way down, I'm going to scroll all the way down to Form, tab that in a few times, and this is going to be that next block. And I'm going to make this div class column small dash 9 and pull left. Scroll all the way down, add the div, save it, and let's do a little refresh in here. It adjusts how this looks. It adjusted quite a bit, so we will do some changes and stuff for it, but now Finalize Checkout, no matter what, is going to be the one that's selected, not if you click on one of these type of thing. So what we're going to do here now is, notice if I select any of these, I want it to actually select what that item is, right? I don't want it to not select it, which is the problem that we have right now. So let's go ahead and go into our form, and we're going to go into, first of all, the shipping address one, and for shipping address. So this right here, we're just going to add a label onto this. So I'm going to do label, and I'll give it a class of label or radio-label. And outside of the N4, I'll just go ahead and do label. Okay. Just kind of clean up. So I did Shift Tab to bring it back, and then Tab to bring it in. So radio label will just refer to the radio buttons themselves. So if I refresh in here, it already changes stuff, and it changes it to having, we have our bold now. It looks a little bit different. So I'm going to do that same thing with our shipping addresses. So, or excuse me, our billing addresses. So billing address, and then I'm going to tab in this label or the input itself and change the label. And there we go. So now we have a little bit of a different look for our label itself. So I'm going to actually add some style to it. So scroll up to our block styles here and do block radio label. And I'll just do font size being 22 pixels and font weight normal. All right, and refresh in here. Now I see it definitely changes the way it looks, right? It actually changes the whole design of the input itself. So now what I'm going to do is actually change the label if it's hovered. So let's go ahead and copy radio label, paste it in, and now I'll do hover. So :hover, and I'll do background color. Let's just say blue. So going back in, refresh. Now if I hover over each one, it's gonna actually change all of them. So what I want to do is look at the code, because that shouldn't happen. So let's go ahead and take a look at the code, see what's going on. And here it is right here. We want to have the label for the actual radio itself inside of the for loop. And I put it on the outside. So let's scroll down and make sure that both of them are just like that. Otherwise, the label is going to be applied to the whole thing. So if I refresh now I can actually scroll over these and even select it, as we see here. So the label allows us to give this selection. So if I click on it, it actually selects what that is. So let's actually change our hover a little bit. I want it to be a different color. So I'm going to make it the same color as this text color right here. So I'm going to go to Inspect Element. The Finalize Checkout, I'm going to change it as that text color. So I'm going to grab this right here. And then in our color, we'll just do that. So now if I refresh, the color is a little bit nicer and it fits that color. So it actually fits a link color that's on Bootstrap. But I also maybe want to change it to being white. So the actual text color being white. So color being white. Refresh. So now when I actually go over which address I want, it will do that. And I also want to change the cursor to have a pointer. So cursor, pointer. So refresh. Now it has a pointer when we're actually over an address, so we can actually select one of them. Notice that when I click on it, it actually is selected. So perhaps what we'll also do is when it's first loaded, when the default is selected, we will add the class of, let's say, radio label selected. So I'm going to copy radio label, hover, sorry, not radio, copy this, and paste it here. Radio label now selected. And this is going to be a class that we'll add if it's the default, right? So in the case of where we had it checked right here, this is where we'll do it. So in here, I'll do class equals to radio label selected, and let's take a look. It doesn't do anything. So there's a few ways we can actually fix this. The simplest way will be to just copy this, paste it inside of the if clause now, and also the else clause, and then just add the class of radio label selected in here. So now the selected address is this one, everything else is that one, and we can do the same thing down below. Radio label selected, and then else in here. So now all I'm doing is, actually I want to add it, make sure you add it inside of this if clause, and you don't need to put a label, end label on the inside of the if clause because it's outside right now for both of them. So just make sure that you have it inside this if, otherwise you'll have some errors go through, as we see there. So we see that there's an error. Looks like I left radio label selected on the billing address. So now it's already showing me the one that's selected, which is cool. So it's starting to look better, right? It's starting to make a little bit more sense and make it easier on the user. Now, if I select a new one, it should get rid of the old one and change that to the selected one. So now what I'll do is we're going to make some jQuery actually change the way this class is selected. So to do that, I'm going to scroll up to our jQuery, and I'll put it at the very top here, and I'm going to say input and then type equals to radio. So if the input type is radio, then on click, we want to do a function. And what we're going to do is we're going to change everything with label, remove class. So I'm going to scroll down and check out what class it is, and that's radio label selected. So remove class, that. So let's test that out. Do a refresh in here. And we've got our pre-selected ones. If I click on another one, it removes that class. Now, unfortunately, it's removing it on both of them right now because we have two different radios. So we might have to clean that up a little bit. But I'm actually not going to clean it up because if they're changing their shipping address, then perhaps they should change their billing address as well, or at least reconfirm their billing address being selected. And then, so now that it's clicked and selected, we also want to add a radio label selected to the current whatever the current radio's clicked. Now this can get a little bit of a pain if we do it this way. So what we could also do is, instead of worrying about the radio that was selected, we could just see whatever radio label that was selected, because that's more likely what's going to happen. So dot radio label selected. So I'm going to remove class from all of them, basically, on all the labels. And then on this particular label, I'm going to add class radio label selected. Okay. Refresh in here. Click on it. Perfect. So this is now showing us the different radio labels that are being selected. Okay. So this is showing also, well, what if we click on the radio itself? It's still working, right? So if you click on the radio itself, the label will be removed, and it's being removed from both places, which is good and bad, but that's something we'll worry about later. Right now, what I want to do is get rid of those quotes, put a semicolon there. Okay, so now we've got that done. Let's actually change the way it looks. So I'm going to go into Inspect Element. And I'm going to make the padding, being the top and bottom, I will make it 2 pixels. And then left and right, I'll make it 4 pixels. Or maybe let's say 6 pixels. So now it's got a nice little padding around it, so it's going to look a little bit better. And then we can say border radius. We can add a border if we wanted to make it rounded. Just like a nice little rounded button there. That looks kind of nice. So I'm going to leave it as border radius here. Now, border radius, in this case, I'm just going to leave it as is. It's not going to be perfect for all these other ones. Oops, selected. Put it in selected. So in other browsers, that border radius might not work perfectly, but that's okay. So selected, I want to make sure that I have hover being with the same padding as selected. So there we go. So we've got hover and selected, and it's got that nice rounded area there. So then I want to actually make the radio button itself being hidden. So display being none. So then that radio button goes away. So it's not actually showing up anymore, because then they can just select whichever one they want to select. So to do that, we now do radio label dot radio. And we'll do display none. And we'll refresh and go, that's actually not showing it correctly, because that's not how you would actually do it. So to actually do it, you change this to being input, and then brackets, type equals to radio. Now going back in here, we refresh. We see that those radios go away. The radio buttons are no longer there, which is great. So now I can actually have a little bit of a nicer looking kind of dynamic address form, and clicking it looks a little bit nicer. So let's actually make the shipping address itself all the way across, and then the billing address being all the way across. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to here to add, well, not add new shipping address, but if current addresses. So this being 12, and then if current billing addresses, or if billing address also being 12. And now if I refresh it, it looks a little bit nicer. Notice shipping address is still kind of brought in a little bit, and that's because of div class row here. So if we wanted to change that, we could get rid of that div class row. And now it's going in as well. Credit card info, we can also change that. Get rid of the row. This again will be up to you. And get rid of the row inside of that form. All right. And now that credit card info is in there, and it's still the same size. Notice that the lines are not broken, right? So it's still, it has a few addresses on the same line. So we definitely want to make sure that our lines are being broken. So it's actually showing the input as its own separate line. Otherwise, we're going to run into a lot of confusion with our users. So what I'll do is I'm going to do some tests. Inspect element here first and see, okay, we've got this. So all of our labels are listed out, but after the label, there is no actual break because that break is inside the label right now. So I'm going to cut this, paste it here a couple times just to make sure the labels are all separated. Refresh, and now they're all separated. There we go. So it looks like our fonts are changing size, which is something we also don't want. It's because of our padding here. So let's copy this padding and add it onto the radio label itself. It's not the fonts that were changing size, it was the padding. Okay, so now that looks a little bit nicer. I don't need as much breaking because I can actually add in margin now. So I'm going to go ahead and have one break and add in some margin on top and bottom, or just actually that works just fine just like that. We might want to have a border around it on its default state. So in our label, let's say border, and we'll do 1 pixel solid, and I'll just do CCC. So a nice little gray color there. And we still might want to have it rounded. So let's go ahead and do that. Border radius being 8 pixels, just like all the other ones. And now it's going to be nice and rounded. So we have our different shipping addresses that we can pick from. And perhaps we want to have it make it look a little bit even different than that. So let's add in some to our padding to being 10 pixels. I'm actually going to take off the padding and border radius from our hover and also selected because it doesn't need to be there because radio label is going to be up for everything. So now I'll go back into inspect element and we can change our padding here a little bit. Let's change it to just a bigger number on both of them, just so it's nice and easy to select an address depending on which one they want to use. So I'm going to do 4 and 30 pixels from left to right. Okay. Padding. Change this to 4 and 30. Semicolon at the end. Do a refresh. There we go. So now that's starting to look a little bit better. We've got our shipping addresses and then a billing address. Now, of course, if we click it, it does remove the other one. So that's something we will have to kind of figure out sooner or later. But the simple solution would be just to change the classes for shipping label and billing label. So radio label, we could have another set just like this for shipping, which is something you might want to do. All right, so now we have our shipping address and billing address, and all that stuff looks good. And this, since we have this current total, it makes it a lot easier for when they want to scroll through this. And also when you get to a mobile device, it's going to be nice and friendly for us. And then when we click on these things, maybe we'll have it bring it down to that next section. But that's not something I'm going to worry about yet. Realistically, now that I have my shipping and billing, before continuing, we are going to actually make the radio labels a little bit different for each one. And so I'm actually just going to go ahead and copy parts of this. So I'll go ahead and copy the whole thing of the styles and paste it in. And now I'm going to just call it, instead of radio label I'll call this one billing label. Billing dash label, and just copy all of this, paste it. All right. So the reason I'm doing this is just to make it simple on us to go down into where our billing address is and change it to being billing label, selected billing label, and billing label. And then on our actual jQuery function, billing label, remove billing label and billing label. So if I refresh, this will allow me to make the different selections in other places. There is a easier way to do this, or there is another way to do this, not necessarily easier. This is the easiest way to do it. The other way to do it would be to make a smarter jQuery function and also go through our styles and make those a little bit different. However, in the essence of time, we want to eliminate too much work for us at this point because we want to get this finished and up. And now we have our shipping address where we can select different ones, and then our billing address where we can also select different ones. And of course, you might want to consider actually changing the color for billing and shipping, but that's also not completely necessary. And another thing you might want to think about is when you click on billing and shipping, perhaps we have a function that brings it to our current total or whatever the checkout process is over here. Because then we can also have it for credit card and attach that kind of to the order or finalize order or submit payment or whatever. We could put that over here so it's kind of a running like look at what's going on. Okay, so if you have any questions on this one, let me know. Otherwise, let's keep going.